Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Grid, and I want to take a little minute here and introduce Mr. Dylan Rupp, our Director of Technical Marketing. Dylan, how are you, bud?
I'm well. How are you?
You know, I decided on this orange flannel today because
Great.
I wanted to brighten up the world.
You don't need the flannel to brighten up my day.
Oh, come on. So I know this is a new role for you, right? The Director of Technical Marketing. I know we did some, we basically were on camera all day yesterday shooting some new content for the new product line, the 314 amp hour battery. So excuse my voice today, guys. It's probably a little rough. But a couple things I wanted to talk about is in your early background with solar, right? You've been in the industry a long time, just like I have. What kind of problems were you actually seeing in the field that frustrated you the most when you first got into the industry?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I think that it became pretty apparent early on as I started my journey into solar that there was just a lack of understanding in how, especially battery-based systems came together. When I started out in solar, still grid-tied solar ruled the day. There weren't the market dynamics in play that there are today that make batteries so beneficial for customers. And so a lot of customers, or a lot of our installers who were using the product that I was working with at the time, were only used to installing grid-tied systems. And so they didn't understand always the benefit of a battery. They didn't understand how a battery got deployed, how to commission those batteries, and then certainly they were leaving their homeowners probably wanting on knowledge around the systems that they actually did install for those customers, on what it would do for them, how they needed to interact with it, if they did need to interact with it, et cetera. So pretty immediately recognized that there was an opportunity to become a subject matter expert, if you will, even though I was early in my career, because everybody was kind of learning a new technology together in the market.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, what we're going to say, I'm going to say 11 years ago. It's in that neighborhood, 11, 12, somewhere like that. And when I first got into solar, like batteries were just unheard of, right? Like it just wasn't a thing. And then you started to see kind of the big three start to roll them out. You know, you had, SolarEdge brought out their battery. Tesla, started with the Powerwall. Enphase had, I don't remember what the nomenclature was, like a 10T or 10P battery, whatever that was. And it might as well have been a foreign language for us. Like as a professional installer then, with the like traditional grid side, you would just be like, I don't understand.
These extra components need to come in. How do I commission it?
Well,
now, and you're taking over a different aspect of ownership for that customer's electricity, right? When you're installing grid-tied solar, it only works when the grid works.
That's right.
And it really just exists, and it produces what it produces, and it sends that power out. A battery is a whole different animal, right? You're taking ownership now of, I'm responsible for your loads being powered in your home.
How do you manage that power, right?
Exactly.
When are you on the accelerator? When are you off? How do you mitigate that? I think the biggest thing that we saw too when we first started deploying battery systems was the lack of knowledge from inspectors of understanding how that worked. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know I'm sure you've seen it. We still see it today.
Of course.
And we're 10 years into battery storage. So what have you seen in that experience?
Yeah, it's funny. You kind of have two worlds there, right? You have your inspectors who, when you come across an inspector who maybe doesn't have that familiarity, you have your inspector who will say, well, you must be the subject matter expert, so I just kind of trust you. And we do like those guys, especially before we do what we need to do to make sure our systems are safe, but it gives us an easy path to get deployed. But then you have your other inspector who's going to delve in and really work to challenge you on every single aspect of that system. And those guys have benefit too, right? Because they keep us on our toes. They make sure that what we're deploying, we can
keeping us honest.
Yeah, we can explain exactly why we've certified our products the way we have, the safety mechanisms that we've built into the product, how those things work. And so there's benefit to both, certainly. And again, I think it's an education exercise for those guys as much as it is for some of the installers in the field to explain to them how this technology works, and more importantly, why it is safe and impactful for that homeowner who's opted into the solution.
Interesting. So at what point did you realize that most solar issues weren't hardware problems, but lack of understanding problems? And I see this all the time, and I'll share a story with you, but I'm curious, what do you see on that side?
I mean, when was almost, like I said, almost immediately, right? As soon as I started taking phone calls and having to talk to homeowners and installers alike. The company I was with did support a kind of DIY model. They also supported professional installers. Regardless of who I was talking to, it was pretty clear that they had either deployed the hardware correctly but didn't understand how to commission it appropriately, or they had failed to deploy the hardware correctly, and then so it wasn't behaving as they suspected because it never was installed. It's funny though, right? I mean, I think it's pretty pervasive in the industry. We all laugh. We all know the acronym RTFM.
That's right.
Read the friggin' manual.
That's it.
Right? And that exists for a reason, because we're all sitting there going, if only somebody would read the manual, we could eliminate 65% of our support calls.
Massive amount of support calls could go away. So I see it a lot, and this is something I know we've worked on. I know we recently, God bless, recently launched the new EG4 Connect app, which is what I would consider to be more homeowner based. It's very intuitive, very user friendly. It's a very quick overview. Hey, what's your system's doing? Do you have any issues, faults, alarms, anything like that? And that's great. And then if you turn around and you look at our older monitoring platform, just the EG4 monitoring, it is what I would consider to be more engineering focused, right? It's very, very granular, right? You can go in and you can look at very specific voltage readings and, charge current and discharge current. And before we launched the EG4 Connect app, and I actually haven't even seen a homeowner that's had the EG4 Connect app. We just launched it. So hopefully we'll start seeing some of that come through. But anytime an installer goes out and installs and then says, hey, just download this EG4 monitoring app, and they basically walk away.
Yep.
And then, you get a homeowner calling this installer, and then the installer's calling me going, hey, this homeowner doesn't understand any of this. How do we get them?
Can you explain it to them?
Right. You can, but if they don't understand, electrical theory and kilowatts and sellback rates and time of use plans and peak shaving and load shedding, all of these things, right, it becomes very, very complicated and almost to the point where the homeowner becomes discouraged by their solar system.
Absolutely.
Because they don't understand it. They don't know how to make it benefit them. So I think the new EG4 Connect app is going to help people or homeowners be a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more in touch with their solar system, and allow them to be more confident that their system is going to meet their expectations.
Yep.
So I think that's a good world. I know some of the other ones. I mean, I've installed pretty much every system that I can think of, and some of the other ones have their applications are very, very user-friendly from a homeowner's perspective, but they also don't have the granularity that we have to make those very fine-tuned adjustments to really dial in a homeowner's expectations and meet their, their financial needs and things like that for their utility cost. So it's one of those. What gaps did you notice between how systems are designed on paper versus how they're installed in real life?
I think where you come across those, generally speaking, the gap really exists in the expectation of what the solution is going to deliver for you, right?
Yeah.
And so, across my career, I've had a couple different hats that I've worn, and one of those hats was as a director of technical sales for a team. And so, what I always train my team to ask when they were talking to installers reviewing a system design of our solution that we were working with was, well, what are you trying to achieve with this system? What does a homeowner expect you're going to do with this system? Right. And so, you would hear customers who said, oh, well, they want to back up their whole house. And you would say, well, hey, but you just did a sub panel for some critical loads. All these other loads aren't going to be backed up.
That's right.
Right. Or they said, oh, well, we wanted to do time of use offset. And the way they had deployed the system didn't necessarily lend itself to that type of application because they were missing some components or hardware. So really, I think when you come across those things, the gap is always often in the expectation versus what they've designed, as opposed to they've designed the system incorrectly. You do see that from time to time. People land the wrong equipment on a certain input of the system or what have you. Those are easy to resolve. And you can just give somebody a blanket line diagram with no context, and they'll get that correct. But where you see that gap is taking it to the next level to say, okay, you've designed it a certain way. Now is the way you've designed it going to actually be deployed in a way that meets the expectations of what you're trying to do with the solution?
I had an installer, and I'm not going to call them out because they're good people. It was actually a design issue. It wasn't even the installers, but They installed it, critical loads panel, just partial home backup, nothing crazy. But on their critical loads panel, they moved virtually all of their largest loads over, right? Air conditioner, electric oven, electric water heater. And they kept popping the fuses in the AC disconnect. So I go out on site over there and meet the installers out there, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, well, we built it to plan. okay, so that's a design issue, right? But let's get this homeowner resolved. So we had to go through and pull all the large loads out, move them back over to the non-backed up panel, and then moved over a couple of smaller, circuits and, internet, Wi-Fi, stuff like that. But so design for us is probably one of the biggest things, because a lot of major design firms are still in that learning curve of that hybrid, whole home backup situation. So I spend a ton of my time just doing design calls and reviewing
Absolutely.
plan sets, just to ensure that homeowners' expectations are being met.
Yep.
So it's a very complicated algorithm, I guess, when you look at it from that world. Like an installer, they just know what's on paper, right? They get handed a plan set and they go, "This is what we're going to do today."
Yep.
And then the homeowner doesn't get what they expect, and now they're mad. And then now the installer's mad, and they call me, and I go, "Well, you probably shouldn't have designed it the way that you did."
Yeah, and what it really, I'll say, bums you out when you're in that situation that you just described is, as you start moving some of those loads over, you hope that there's not an expectation from the homeowner because of what they were sold that, what do you mean my pool pump's not going to be running when the grid is down? Right. And now you have to go and you have to re-educate them and reset on expectations, and they might feel like they're not necessarily getting what they paid for.
So one of my favorite things in the world is, because all right, so when I first got into batteries, my biggest thing that we got taught when I was in that world was the things that you back up, like your food, right? Refrigerator, freezer, internet is even optional, right? Life-saving devices, grandma's oxygen, supply, things like that. And now today, I live in Arizona, right? Air conditioning for most Arizonans, especially where I live in southern Arizona, air conditioning is not an option. They're like, we have to back that up. And it's just such a large load to demand out of a battery and a solar system that even if you do back it up, you may not get the longevity of backup that the outage may incur.
Yep.
So there's this expectation, and you have to be realistic with your homeowners. And I think this is where, from a sales organization standpoint, they need to be defining that with the homeowner. Yes, we can back up your air conditioner. However, it may not run as long as the outage is present. So that's a big one.
I think that's where it's on us, however, as OEMs, and something EG4 is started to take on, right, is to develop solutions that'll help with that. And you see that with some of the technology we've started to implement into our solutions, where we'll automatically do things like load shed some of those devices so the house doesn't go dark, and you can run your AC for some period of time, and then you'll turn it off.
Right. Once your battery starts hitting that SOC limitation, you can start knocking off those things and then maintain those other things that are really, really necessary, i.e. your refrigerator, your freezer, your internet, things like that.
But you better explain that to the homeowner so they don't think their HVAC went belly up in the middle of a grid outage, right?
120 degrees outside, and the AC just shuts down. So how would you describe your personal mission in solar? Like in plain terms, right? In layman terms, how would you describe that?
I want to see this equipment deployed on Main Street, USA. I want everybody to have access to energy independence. I want everybody to be able to invest in their energy freedom by installing these types of solutions. And so the things that we can do to help people get there, I'm all in on.
I want to see solar on every single home globally. I think every single person. I mean, the sun is just this unlimited resource that we've barely tapped into.
Absolutely.
And it's going to rise and it's going to fall every single day for at least the rest of our lives, right?
A lot of roof space up there, otherwise just absorbing all that heat into asphalt shingles, right?
That's right. Just cooking them, right? Getting that granule loss. So why has education and clarity always mattered so much to you in the industry? Like just having that, I'm going to call it an open dialogue. Why is that so important in the industry?
I think we've talked about all the reasons why already. I think that it's incredibly important to make sure that people understand what they're investing in, what they're installing, as they're going to do that work, so people don't have unrealistic expectations. People understand what they're being delivered, how that solution is going to work. Without that, again, it just leads to some frustration and some maybe ill will towards the solution that they've invested in. It's funny. A good example of that is I have a friend who he had somebody come knock on his door and sell him grid-tied solar, and the individual sold that to him, promised him he would not have an electric bill anymore. Then I was asking him how his system was going, and he was kind of discouraged and was explaining to me, well, he told me I wasn't going to have an electric bill, But here it is in the summertime, and I just got $120 bill. And I said, oh, man, that really stinks. I'm sorry to hear that happened. I'm happy to take a look at it if I can, whatever. But then I said, hey, but by the way, what were you paying before? And he said, well, before we got the solar, my electric bill was usually $350, $400 a month.
Right.
I said, oh, interesting. Okay, well, what's your solar loan? And he said, oh, it's about $100. I said, okay. How about what's your bill in the wintertime? He said, oh, we don't have a bill in the wintertime. I was like, okay. And I said, well, hey, if you really think about it, I know that maybe you didn't expect this bill, but you're saving a lot of money still. This is a pretty good investment for you.
If you do it annually, if you look at your cost annually versus those short spurts of when it's extremely hot or extremely cold and you get that, that high winter bill or that high summer bill, but it does offset, annually.
Definitely.
And I mean, I don't have a battery system in my house. And I would say for the most part, I also have that same issue, right? I have an extremely high summer bill because of, the temperatures in Arizona, but my winter bill is virtually nothing.
Right.
So if I do the math and I add it all up and I look at my solar payment, I look at what I'm saving, it is a benefit still for me. It's not the $0 benefit that the sales rep obviously was implying, but there is a good benefit to it. But again, this is where battery storage really comes into play, where you can manage how you use that power.
Absolutely. Well, and even before that, expectation setting, right? Because that was kind of what I explained to him is it stinks that maybe this guy didn't understand what he was selling fully and told you were going to have no bill year round. You're still saving a boatload of money with this system, right? You're paying way less than you would have. And he was like, yeah, I guess it has worked out pretty well. And so I think, it's just important to set those expectations correctly because for you understand why that's happened. You understand what's going on there. For him, he doesn't understand. He thinks the system might be having issues.
Right.
And it's hard to, I studied engineering in school. I was a chemical engineer. When I decided to start transitioning to renewable energy, I had to do a bunch of education to understand the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour. And I was coming from a very technical background.
Right.
If you're a dentist, right? Still a very
probably
technical
have
job.
zero electrical theory.
Yeah, you have no background there to lean on. So it's important that those expectations are set. People are educated appropriately when they get this equipment.
I got to bring this up. The biggest thing I see with guys in solar or homeowners in solar is you get a sales guy comes up, hey, we're going to put this on your system. We looked at your kilowatt hour usage over the year. This is what's going to fit your model. And a lot of homeowners go, oh, I got solar. I don't have to turn anything off. I can just, every light in the house is on, every TV's on, every kid's iPad's charging, Xbox is playing, whatever it is. And that has always been one thing that I always get tagged with. Guys are like, oh, well, they said it was going to be zero. And I'm like, yeah, but let's look at last year's bill compared to this year's bill, and their kilowatt hours is skyrocketed.
That consumption changes a lot.
Right, because they're like, oh, I got solar. I don't have to worry about it. And that's unfortunately just not the case, right?
Yep.
So that's always fun. So what happens to installers and homeowners when systems aren't clearly understood? And I think we kind of just covered it a little bit. Again, this is that kilowatt hour one's a prime example of that. Yeah. That you get solar and you're like, oh, I can just let this thing just run and run and run, and my kids can plug this in and turn this on and leave. And so that's one thing for me that comes up. But from you, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a homeowner perspective, there likely will be some disappointment, right? Even if at the end of the day, it actually was a great investment. If they thought they were getting something that isn't fully delivering against those expectations, it's just human nature to feel disappointment in that, which is unfortunate because, again, it's actually been a phenomenal investment for you likely. And then from an installer perspective, right, you're going to create friction for yourself. You're going to create potentially bad reviews, claims against your business, service calls that aren't necessary, right? We hear about that all the time. The example we talked about, somebody puts or turns on a large load, runs their battery down to zero, and then they're calling their installer saying, hey, there's an issue with my system. Well, the issue with their system is they drain their battery because they chose to run a large load. But they did that probably because they weren't properly educated on how the system actually works.
That's true. So, I think, and I'm going to use this as a reference. So when I was a young man, I used to build cars for a living. That was kind of my thing with my dad. We built race cars. And I remember very vividly, I'm not going to mention the name of the auto parts company, but I was in an auto parts company, and this lady walks in, and I was standing there buying parts, and this guy was selling her on all of these things that she just ultimately probably didn't need. And I look at that kind of the same way. So, this was man, I'm going to date myself here, probably 25 years ago. And now you look at women in automotive. They are so much more empowered, and there's so much more knowledge available, right? We've got the internet. We've got, different forums and groups and things like that where people can get educated. And you see that now with the solar industry too. 10, 15 years ago, it was just kind of like, yeah, go install solar and, I don't know how it works, but it does what it's supposed to do. And now you have people that are actually researching their projects. They're researching equipment. They're looking at warranties. They're looking at expectations. So I feel like a lot more homeowners are more empowered now to have the knowledge, or at least it's available, right? If they choose not to go do the research, I'm sorry, right? Do your research, guys, please. But it's more readily available, right? We have all the information available. People just need to spend the time to go invest in themselves and in their system to ensure that they're getting their expectations met. So I think that's a good one. What originally made you start paying attention to EG4 as a manufacturer? And I got a good story for this too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I do too, right? So I knew EG4 before EG4 was EG4, I guess. Right?
Okay.
So this is this is probably 2022 was the first time I met James Showalter, the founder of EG4. I was working with a different inverter OEM. At the time, James was selling Gill branded batteries through Signature Solar.
Yep.
And he came to us and expressed some interest in a closed loop communications partnership with this inverter OEM. And so, my coworker actually first met him, was telling me, I met this young kid at a trade show. He was telling me he's going to have a $100 million battery company in a few years. He's really something. You got to meet him.
Hold on, wait. Check.
yeah, absolutely. Good vision on his part. But he came in and he sat down with us and he kind of started to explain what his vision was, what he was doing. And I thought it was really interesting. I'm like, here's this guy out in East Texas, not so far from where we were, doing some really interesting things with, at the time, rack mount batteries and a distribution house. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for that partnership that we were looking at setting up there. But after that, I kind of always kept an eye on Signature Solar, then kind of saw EG4 come about as their in-house brand, and then EG4 spun out into its own company altogether.
Right.
And, kind of was seeing the success that they were having. And then within the last few years, started seeing some products come to market from EG4 that I was really impressed with.
So my story is not as glamorous. I was a professional installer, and we had gone out and we were doing an install. And I won't mention the company, but it was one of the big three. And we finished up all the install stuff. We're doing the interconnection down in the main service panel, and the homeowner comes out and they're like, "Hey, I've got this other battery system that I want to tie into this." And I was like, well, we can take a look at it. And, homeowner opens up the garage and there's this, I don't remember what inverter it was, the old black and yellow ones. So I don't know, 6,000 something, I imagine, and a couple server racks and some batteries. And that was my first introduction to EG4, and I literally knew nothing about it.
What is this thing?
Yeah. And so I started doing my research, and, here we are a couple years after this. And this is when I got the call from Claire here at EG4 and was offered the position to come on board. And by that time, this is right, I think, a little bit after EG4 separated from Signature and kind of became its own sister company. And it was just incredible. From what I saw in this guy's garage to what we are today has just been this impeccable, just driving force in the industry.
Exponential rise.
Oh, it's I mean, in 2 years, right? And just since I started, I have seen us go from virtually zero grid tie to that's probably, I'm going to say probably 70% of our market right now.
Yep.
And that's incredible, right? You don't see that in the industry. And I owe all that to James, or we all owe that to James and his driving force and his knowledge and his willingness to go about and go really drive this into the industry. I know you're a trade show guy. You go with us a lot of times. We got InterSolar coming up next month. So when you look at that in perspective, like we had guys at RE Plus Las Vegas this last year coming into our booth, right, from like the big three or, these other major manufacturers or other pro installers going, "Hey, like, are you guys hiring?" And that's pretty incredible, right? When you get to the point where you are now competitive with these larger companies that have been in the industry for 20 years, and we're a 5-year-old company and we're just climbing the ladder very, very quickly.
Well, What's exciting about that though is we'll still come across installers from time to time who say, "Hey, I didn't know anything about you guys. I'm
Right.
super excited to try this solution."
Yep.
And so it shows that there's some runway there still.
Oh,
right?
definitely.
And yeah, I think we're all invested in continuing to see that growth.
Oh man, I love my job. I've been to the office the last 3 days by like 7 a.m. and I was actually talking to Ty this morning in the office because I beat him in the office the last 2 days, and he was like, "Man," he goes, "You love what you do," and I go, "100%, man." I said, "I wake up every morning just looking forward to jumping into calls and helping people understand the system and what we do with the ecosystem. So it's a lot of fun. I really do enjoy it." So was there ever a moment where you thought, "Okay, this company is doing things differently"?
Yeah.
And what was that difference that kind of made you look at that a little differently?
Yeah. So you kind of touched on I'm moving into this marketing role, and it's going to be focused on product marketing, and it's a nice fit because I'm a product guy. That's kind of what I've found my passion in as it relates to this technology. I've been with EG4 since last February, so about a year.
Almost a year.
But I'll tell you what the turning point was for me. Like I said, I kind of knew back when it was just the S2 house brand, I knew of EG4. But I'd kind of been, keeping my eye on them and would always be a little frustrated when they'd come up from an installer asking, "Hey, how do you compare to this solution? It's really affordable. It's got really great specs," and I never really had a great answer. But what really turned for me was I had an individual who recommended that I meet with James because they were looking to hire some team members. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I know EG4. Let me see what they're up to." And I started kind of digging around into the product portfolio, what the latest products were. And I came across the Grid Boss. The Grid Boss is our smart interconnection device. I'm sure
Your MID.
here,
Yeah.
know about what that is. But what kind of struck me about it was the company I was at the time. I had been in a product management role, and I had been pushing really hard for us to develop an external MID that had smart load shedding capability, had generator integration, would allow you to parallel multiple inverters right at that MID.
Right.
I had personally gone through an installation at my house where this would have been hugely impactful in reducing the cost and complexity of that install. So, personally was seeing that value with kind of what I paid for the installation at my house with an inverter with an internal MID that was utilized. So I come across the Grid Boss and I'm like, "Holy cow, this is exactly what I've been trying to get my team to
Come
build."
on, guys.
Yeah, this is exactly what I've been trying to get my team to build. These guys have a great vision. They're building an innovative product. I'm really interested in going and being a part of this potentially. And so the rest is kind of history, right? Met with James, interviewed, kind of came together like we had hoped. But, that really struck me, right? I already knew what they were doing. I already knew that they had some really impressive deployment numbers. I knew that they were incredibly competitive from a pricing perspective. But then to see that innovation on the technology, to me, really cemented kind of where EG4 was going and the potential that the company had.
Right, and I'm gonna go off of that. Something that I've been very, very impressed with is I spend a lot of time in front of homeowners, customer facing, or with EPCs and professional installation companies. And the one thing that I love about what we do is I can go out to pick an installer, whoever, nationally, doesn't matter. And if I go out there and we do an install, and an installer says, "Hey man, I want to see this feature benefit," or I want to be able to do a 400 amp service, or I want to do multiple inverters without using a combiner panel and then going into an additional item. And what's nice is I can go back to the office, or I can go to my home and sit in my home office, and I can put in an engineering change request and say, "Hey, this is what we saw in the field." And boom, if it's valued and it's going to add value to the product and it's going to make installations easier and give homeowners a better expectation or better end result, we're going to do it.
Absolutely.
And I don't think, at least in my experience, that's not something that a lot of other major manufacturers do. They're pretty, kind of straight and narrow, like this is what we're going to do and that's it.
Yep.
And then if there is engineering, changes that they want to do, then it's a whole nother product line. It's not, updating a current version of a product. It's just revamping the whole system. And that's great that they're doing that. But the timeline, and I've been in the manufacturing industry a long time, with my previous racking experience and things like that. Things don't come to market tomorrow, right? You've got to manufacture it. You've got to test it. You've got to get tooling made. You've got, aluminum extrusions or, whatever it is. So a product may take 2 years to come to market. Well, now you're behind the curve, right? Because now that product is now basically outdated, right? Because solar updates, every 6 months, I would say on average, we get some new product lines and new innovations. So it's very complex in that world where if you do go and build a new product and it takes you 2 years to come to market with it, you're already behind the eight ball. And now you've got to start working on that next iteration. Now, if you're continuing that same pathway, now you're another 2 years behind, and now you're another 2 years behind. Versus what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's make this change on this product while we're still in development of the new product by implementing that thing into the new thing. So we have a much faster go-to-market strategy for our new innovative products, and that's something I'm very, very proud of.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think being market driven is important for us as well, right? We get that feedback. I mean, you're not going to see a lot of companies that have the same level of engagement at the senior leadership levels as our companies have. I mean, there are ways. I'm not gonna blow them up, but there are ways to go engage with James directly online.
Oh, sure.
And he'll have a conversation with anybody about the solution and the product, and he'll listen if you have good insights. So
yeah, I try to stay off of the forums and all that thing,
yeah,
because you can get into the weeds pretty quick.
Oh, for sure. But there's some people on there that have really good insights and some really great recommendations, and that's taken seriously by our leadership, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I know we've got a guy on our team named Kevin on the technical account management side, and he was a beta tester for EG4 prior to coming on board. And that man lives on forums. He's on there, man, just cranking away, just throwing knowledge out there nonstop.
That's awesome.
And I love it because he shares that with us for all the rest of us that don't really want to, go jump into a forum all day. So it's nice to get his feedback of what he's seeing on the forum side. The rest of us on the account management side tend to more deal with more EPCs and customer focused, customer facing side at least. So it is super cool to see. What did EG4 do that other brands weren't doing at the time when you decided to come on board?
Yeah,
I mean the MID obviously was a big one.
Some product innovation, and then again having we kind of both wax poetic about it, and it's not lip service. I think we both really believe getting solar out there for the masses, making it available for everybody. That's literally the mission that EG4 is built on.
That's right.
And so from a go-to-market, from a pricing perspective, from the things that we're trying to develop, we are really trying to build solutions that are available for everybody. And it's why we've had such a phenomenal growth trajectory over the last couple of years, and I think it's going to continue. But that's really what I saw that was different, where you kind of touched on it. Other OEMs are pretty rigid in what they're doing, and they have their profitability that they're going to hit. And
right.
By God, if that number's not there, they're not going to sell the solution. We're certainly, I would say we're more motivated by seeing the technology deployed and empowering people than we are about enriching.
More than percentages on a spreadsheet.
Ownership. Yeah. So, and that comes directly from that leadership. And so that's not something that you get not only in the solar industry, in any industry, right? Yeah. Where you have somebody that's that passionate about empowering their customers, and the money that is being made is simply there to continue the mission and to continue to drive the business forward.
I love the, and I know I say that a lot, guys, I'm sorry, but I truly do love the fact that since I've came on board, we have gone out, and I don't want to say gone out and kidnap guys, but we have brought in some very, very high quality talent that has been in the industry a very long time.
Definitely.
I mean, I'm over a decade. I don't know, what's your time in the industry?
6 years.
6 years, right? Yeah. I think I looked at the technical account management team to see, besides myself and the rest of the team, I think we have a cumulative 70 years of experience.
That's awesome.
In the industry, right? And then you look at I'm not going to mention them by name, but we've got some other C-suite guys that have been in the industry over a decade. We've got some directors that are well over a decade in the industry. And what they're bringing to EG4 is their grid-tied knowledge. And then we're now transitioning that over into the hybrid world and the off-grid world where we're really going to be successful at it. So it's nice to see. What concerns or hesitations did you have before joining EG4? Any apprehensions or anything you were like, man, should I make this move? Or
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I think that as long as I had been familiar with EG4 and kind of understood what the business model was before, I wasn't totally clear on what that strategy was. And as heavily as they were invested in kind of the direct consumer model and the DIY customer base, that's an awesome customer base. We love our DIYers. We love the direct consumer model.
Well, I mean, we wouldn't be here without them, right?
100%. But, I think that still that professional channel is something that's important to go and effectively support as well, right? I mean, you can certainly DIY an air conditioning system. We sell them, right? But
all the time.
If I need to have work done on my HVAC or I have an HVAC issue, I call a professional installer because I'm just, for what various reasons, I'm more comfortable doing it that way. And I think, solar is the same way, right? If we really want to have that mass market penetration, it's important that we tackle all the avenues. And so I wasn't really sure what the business model was there. Kind of talked to the team, right? Already seeing the products they were bringing to market, I kind of understood that was probably the drive that they had. But having that conversation, ensuring that I kind of understood that the go-to-market strategy and mission was evolving a little bit, like you said, where 2 years ago we were probably almost all DIY.
Right.
And a lot of off-grid in that, to where we are today, where 70% is going to be grid-tied. And certainly there are DIYers that are grid-tied, and they do an awesome job. They do a better job a lot of times than some of the professional installers.
A lot.
But yeah, but, still a lot of those are going in through the professional installation channel as well.
You brought up HVAC and calling a professional, and this is a funny story. So the reason I call professionals when things like that break is because I do not want to hear my wife yell at me when I mess it up.
Oh, 100%. Well, like I said, there's a few reasons, and that's a big one for me as well.
Yeah.
I will mess it up, by the way.
I'm getting ready to do my landscaping in my front yard, and I had a company come out and quote it and do all the design work and all that stuff. And me and a buddy of mine was like, yeah, we could do that. And my wife goes, no, you can't. Because she's like, if it doesn't look perfect, she's like, I'm just going to be mad at you every time I pull in the driveway. And I go, touche. Like, I'm.
Oh, man. Well, if you're like me, you do half the project and you get tired of it.
That's exactly right.
Sit there undone for 3 months, right?
So my wife's the same way. She'd be like, honey, like, it's been 9 months. Like, come on. Like,
time to get it done.
Let's get this done. So how did your philosophy line up with James's approach once you started talking about coming on board, and then once you onboarded?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like it was a really good match. Again, I mean, obviously that motivation, my background was worked in oil and gas, wasn't real happy, saw some of the ways that they were treating the environment, the immediately surrounding areas, and was a little disenchanted by that, wanted to do something that was a little more sustainable. But like I said, once I kind of got into solar and storage specifically, I really fell in love with the ability for people to have that energy freedom. So kind of talking to James, understanding his mission, wanting to literally bring energy generation for everyone, right? What EG4 literally stands for, lined up really nicely. And then James is a product guy as well. When you talk to James, he's constantly thinking of a new product to bring to market. Like I said, I come from a product background, so we had a really good conversation. Like I said, I'd met James a few years prior, hadn't really kept in touch, but that first conversation, we just were sitting there back and forth. I think it was an interview technically, and we had probably 3 or 4 people. It was kind of a panel interview, and James and I were just sitting there talking about, we could do this with this product, we could do that with that product.
Right.
Everybody else was just kind of sitting there silent, and then hung up, and I was like, oh, that wasn't much of an interview. That was kind of just a conversation.
just an open dialogue conversation.
But kind of shows, where his passion is at, and it just aligned really nicely. And like I said, I'm super excited to come on board after that.
I love talking to James about stuff like that. However, he gets to the point where I'm like, huh?
Oh, I can't keep up. Don't get me wrong,
I mean, he's just got such a wealth of knowledge and background that it's incredible to have that conversation. And I love talking to him about it, but then he'll get into like these things, and I'm like, I got to go do some research. Like, I didn't quite grasp all of that conversation. But the fact that he's just so involved with everything that we do with new product development, he works with the software team, the firmware team, the engineering team. He works with the sales team. We talk to him quite frequently on our side too. So what stood out about James's leadership style compared to what you had seen in other, OEM, situations or employment that you've had in the past?
Yeah, it's what I touched on. It's funny. I'll pause here and say I didn't come into this interview just wanting to blow James up, but it's easy to do, right? When you start talking about EG4 and what we're really doing. But it's what his motivation is. simply stated. And it's what our company's motivation, our whole leadership team's motivation is, which is, again, not to build a company that they can just turn around and sell and enrich themselves and go do something else or retire, right?
Right.
They want to deploy energy solutions for people. Full stop. That's what they're in this business to do. That's what they've made it their mission to do, and that's what they're driving toward. And I don't, like I said, in any business, I don't think you have a lot of mission-driven leaders like that. I think a lot of times the motivations are different than
I would say in my
their
experience, it's
money.
profit driven. Yeah,
Yeah, money
100%. Yeah, I mean, you've got your innovative side of it. You've got your engineering team, and we all look at each other's products, right? I still do it. I still go look at all of the big three, and I look at their new innovation products because I've got to compete against that, right? When I'm out selling or I'm talking to a customer, and they're like, "Well, I was going to buy this." And why should I buy this over this? So I've got to have some background knowledge on what all these other manufacturers are doing. I see that too, for sure. Yeah, I like the innovative side of us, and really what we're trying to drive and do is get all these systems deployed and really give people that energy independence that they're all driving to get. Why was that alignment important to you before making the move to EG4? Was it like a comfortability factor for you where you're like, I feel comfortable with the way that James is operating his business model and what their trajectory is, or what do you think there?
Yeah, certainly didn't want to be in a position where, look, the company I worked for before was great. Really liked the people that were there, but wanted to challenge myself to continue to grow, challenge myself to see, how far we could push it in the market or push these solutions into the market. And I really saw an opportunity to do that when I started to chat with the leadership team at EG4 to understand what that mission looked like, what the strategy was, more so than even where I was at before, frankly.
Yeah.
And so that made it, an easy decision, frankly, to come and be a part of what they were doing and hopefully drive that mission even further along.
So I know I was apprehensive at first when I first got the call, even though I had done a little bit of research. I had just gotten out of what I'm going to call a bad relationship. I was working for an EPC, and unfortunately that EPC went out of business very, very quickly. And so when you look at EG4, when they're not this, when you're in the big, that grid tied industry, right, and you're working with the big three and, all of this, you feel pretty comfortable that they're not going to go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then you look at EG4 being this very, I'm going to call them a small organization, right, in comparison
Startup.
to some of these others, right? And you go, all right, East Texas, small company, new to the industry, new to grid-tied solar. Are they going to be around? Is this a move that I shouldn't make? Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to be searching for a job in 6, 8 months, 10 months, a year, whatever it is. So it was just one of those things where I really took a long, hard look and said, is this really the move I want to make? And is it going to be beneficial for me long-term in the industry? So that was one of the big things for me. What is how is the role different from traditional marketing role in solar to technical marketing? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap there. I'll say that really what we're trying to do is be a little bit more product driven in some of those marketing messages. Right, I mean, coming back to the top of the conversation here, a lot of what we're seeing in the market and in the industry with confusion or gaps in understanding probably can be addressed early on, both at the homeowner level and at the installer level rather. And so the technical marketing is going to try to take ownership of that and address a lot of those gaps, right? So one, not only as you're deploying these solutions and what I'll say are more traditional deployment strategies, you have a really good understanding of how you're doing things and why you're doing things maybe, but then also making sure people understand some of the less common application cases that they've maybe deployed the solutions into, but are very powerful and beneficial for them, right? So as you look around the country, every market's a little different, right? Where you live out in Arizona, you have some really unique rate structures.
Yeah, we do. Not good ones.
Well, with an energy storage system, you can take advantage of it, right?
That's right.
And then for me in Texas, where I live, I actually live in north side of Houston, and I'm in the regulated Intergy area in Texas, and so my rate structure is a little different than my parents who live just south of me in Houston, and they're on the deregulated ERCOT market, and so they can opt into a bunch of different rate plans. And so Understanding kind of what those look like and the application cases that you can utilize against those can be incredibly beneficial to closing a sale, saving a homeowner a lot of money.
That's right.
Deploying them a solution that's going to be reliable. Like I said, I live in Houston, so hurricanes hit. There's outages that are extended. A reliable system and a prolonged outage is incredibly important. So making sure that we're just telling that story effectively on, here are how the ways you can use our equipment and some of the different application cases that it can operate in.
Awesome. Hey, man, I know I got to run. I got a couple meetings I got to jump into.
Sure.
But Dylan, man, great talking to you. Great having you on this new role. I look forward to working really closely
Likewise.
with you and whatever ends up being the rest of your new team as you continue to develop that. Hey, guys, thanks for joining us on Beyond the Grid. Be sure to check us out at Inner Solar, February 18th through the 21st, I believe, San Diego, California. If you want to see me, I believe Dylan will also be there. If you want to come shake hands and meet the stars of the show, we'd love to talk to you. Love to get some interactions and get some feedback from you. Thanks for joining.